Really? We'd have to wait a month until we painted the car?
You can actually sand and paint it the next day if you wanted to. Collision, that's how you would do it. But doing a restoration, you got time. So you can sit it there and let that cure. Rush it, and you sand it, say, the next day, and then you paint it. Well, yeah, they look great when they roll out the door, but what's that car look like a year down the road when everything's cured and shrunk up?
And if you will remember, back to the barn find,
The fender, was nothing wrong with it. There was no rust in it. It had one dent in it.
It's got
The dent was super easy to fix. It's the original date code on it, so there's no reason not to fix it.
and one very good reason to fix it.
You can see right here how it has a slight curve in this gap. Now, a repo fender won't. It'll be straight, and it kind of makes that look distorted. You got that curve where it's perfect, and that says right there that's original metal.
Notice Jason mounted the fender to do the work. How long do you think this job would take?
Probably about 2 hours just sanding that piece right there.
Same amount of time to fix this fender. Yeah.
That's the Lenco dent puller.
So it just plugs in the regular wall outlet?
It requires a 220. It tacks itself to the steel, and then you have a slide hammer. You pull it out, you hammer and dolly it, get it smooth, and the metal is as perfect as you can. It's kind of like a welding rod in a way. That's a typical body hammer. I use this one probably the most because it has the pecking hammer that pecks down your little bit high spots. They got rounded heads. There's tons of different body hammers. Just get on the back side of that and work it. They have the dollies the same way. You got a shrinking hammer and a shrinking dolly. We pulled the dent out and worked it a little, and you have the original sheet metal on the car now. It's an easy process. It does take a little practice, but anybody can get the tools and practice and, you know, get there. After you get through pulling the dent, you got to do some plastic work on it, and then put a sealer on it, and then put plastic over that. But I'll go ahead and glaze the whole edge of this. It's got some slight ripples. Be glazing this hide scoop. Use my finger to fill in any light pinholes that are in it. Blend the edges out with.
What's going on now is Jason is fitting body panels and working fiberglass.
Few small spots. I'm going to recoat this because there's a high spot that needs to be blended out. Right here, there's a real light high spot.
Some pieces will be on and off the car multiple times until finally every piece looks just right, has passed inspection,
And I moved to the 100 grit.
and is mounted on the car, ready for the application of that final coat of primer.
After recoated a few spots, blended it out now. I'm gonna switch paper to the 180. Then you'll be able to fill it even better. Any imperfections, if you need to recoat it. And then sand it out to perfection. Get all the little imperfections out with the body filler. Block all the E-coat.
E-coat, E for epoxy, epoxy primer.
With the 180, it'll help find any light dings or dents or ripples, stuff that may or may not need to be coated before primer. For instance, there's a light, tiny little ding right there. Put a little glaze in that. And regardless if this was a brand new fender, an NOS fender, whatever, most of this up to the top will have to be done. All that has to be worked out, massaged out. All this is always wavy from the get-go, regardless if it's aftermarket, Ford, even if it's another brand, Mopar or Chevrolet, you gotta do the same thing. This fender here is the fender that had the big dent on the front of it. I've got it ready for primer. It also has some light rippling across the fender lip. And then right in through this area, it had some factory ripples and waves. And of course the edges of it were rippled on the factory. Most all this work in through here is just getting the factory flaws out of the panel. Same way across the top of the fender. These fenders are wide and they're real bad about having lots of little ripples. So it's usually easiest just to do a light glaze coating and then file it down. A lot of times I'll have elbow dents from working on the engine. Maybe passenger side fender, still working on it a little bit. It has some light ripples and stuff across the front edge where it was stamped. And then they usually always have a high spot right in through there, usually right where they meet the cowl panel. And of course, right here, the factory ripples. On all these fiberglass parts, you have to strip them by hand. You want to get all of that off. When you put the modern stuff on it, that stuff can age and it can cause peeling, it can cause cracking. So all of it needs to come off. You can actually see right here where it's peeling off the original primer. It's not stuck as good as it should be. You can just flake it right off. That is the original primer, that red oxide. That's why you can't just sand this and prime it and paint it.
So you want it down to the black?
You want it down to the black, to the gel coat. Then you'll have a quality paint job and you'll have a foundation that you know ain't gonna peel off, crack.
Let's look at the final preparation for paint using the doors.
The bodywork's been done to the door, all the filler work. And then I put usually 2 to 3 coats of this on it. It's a polyester primer. So it's a lot like the glazes and stuff or the premium fillers, but it's in a sprayable form basically. And then let it dry for about 3 days. This is a 3-day cure on this polyester primer. The blocks that I use are usually the Dura blocks, and they're a rigid but slightly flexible. The thing today is a lot of shops are using blocks that are about this long, and it covers the whole panel at one time. On these Mustang doors, there's a lot of curves and nooks and crannies, a lot of light curves. This is the longest block I'll ever use. The long blocks are hard to keep a uniform pressure. When a block like this, you can keep your hands on it, you can have a uniform pressure. Or even a shorter block like that, where you can actually have a uniform pressure instead of having a block this long where you're concentrating on one little spot and the rest of the block actually isn't having a good pressure point. Or they're so long you gotta have 2 people run it. All the stuff that I've ever blocked, I've used long blocks, I've used short blocks. The end result, 90% of the time, depends on how good of a body man you are, how good you straighten the metal. It doesn't matter how good you actually block the primer. A primer will take out imperfections, but mostly like a Bondo edge or pinholes or something like that. Primer's not gonna straighten up a panel to where you get all the waves. That's in your body work. I also have a teardrop shaped block for these curved areas. That actually fit down in there, block that area real nice. And then the tighter areas, like across the top of the door, I have a round block. Fits in there real nice, and you can block out all the small curves. And they're all semi-rigid. I actually prefer, when I do body work, a file or something like this, because it's fully rigid. You have no flex, it's perfectly straight. I have some of these blocks I've been using for 25 years plus. That I've found, even with these new modern blocks that are 100 feet long, you just can't beat the old stuff. This is the paper I'll use. It's a 180 grit gold. And I'll start out with the teardrop. Do the body lines first and then blend them in with the long block. And when you block the light tracer, you can see the black. That's just a Krylon, and that gives you a tracer coat. You can see the highs and lows of the tracer coat. And you can go back and add a tracer coat as you sand as well. And you want to do it in an X motion. You go one way and then go the other way. No matter what you block, doing filler work, primer work, any kind of blocking, You always do it in an X motion. So these doors have it curves and then it curves. So you have a lot of different curves in this. Use a round block like this, go one way, and then we'll use a flat block and kind of come up towards the curve. These doors also usually work where they press this lower body line in. It comes to a point right here. And on 90% of them, they usually have a big low spot, about like that. Where they kind of sink in, where they crimp that. So I usually work all that and kind of float it out with filler to take care of that low spot. This will kind of ball up a little bit. If you do it the day after you prime it, it balls up real bad. After 3 days, it is usually pretty cured out. The longer you let something cure, the better. You don't have to put a lot of pressure. It's just a light, medium pressure. You let the sandpaper do the work. Normally I like to do this outside on a nice day. If you have the wind kind of lightly blowing, you can block it and you can blow the dust constantly away from you. Good to have multiple different blocks or different areas. You can use this round one. And they're actually, the DuraBlock has a whole kit that comes with all the blocks in one. I'll block until I start breaking through the primer. That's how you know you're doing some good. As you start, your highs and lows will start popping through. You'll start seeing either the black E-coat or you have filler. You'll start kind of seeing that. And that's usually a stopping point. Paper on these long blocks. We'll start doing the long block. Dust it with a little bit of black Krylon. This gives it a tracer coat. That way you kind of know where you're at. And the tracer will get like down in the pinholes or scratches that you can see that you might need to address, or it'll show the highs and lows, like you have a slight low spot, like here on this door that I've already blocked. You can see it has a little bit of a low spot through here at the block, so I'm going to have to put some more filler here, and then you can see some of those gouges that need to be feathered out more. These are some light high spots, and that's what I do is I block it until you start kind of seeing some spots like that. If you can't fill them, then they're fine, but if you can rub your hand across them, you kind of got to develop a feel for bodywork. If you fill them, then you have to tap them down and recoat them with some filler or some glaze. Right here is a slight low spot. You can see where the tracer and the primer, and that's just a factory little low spot in the corner there. And then the way they crimp the door skin on it has a little bit of a high spot right there on that edge. And you can tap that high spot down a little bit and then put a little bit of glaze and kind of blend that corner in, and then that'll make that perfect. And right here I work this edge, and you can see that this primer right here wasn't really blocked, so it's a little low right through there, and that's a factory flaw. Like normally that would have just been painted over and not worried about, but I'm going to go back and put just a tiny bit of filler right on that edge and work that until it's got a perfect edge through there.
So Jason, is this something you take pride in your work, right?
Yeah, you got to take pride and you got to have a passion for it, because it is extremely time consuming. So if you don't like doing this, then you need to find a different profession or different hobby, because it's something you have to enjoy doing. And it's very rewarding if you do enjoy it, as you can take something like this that's beat up and rippled up and make a perfect nice panel out of it, and you get a very good reward out of it, not to mention the value of your car goes up. So now I'm going to start blocking the big flat areas with this long block, and I just usually put a medium tension on it, and it's an X, block it in an X formation. Just let the paper do its job and take your time. That's where blocking the panel on a table is a lot easier, taking it off and blocking it than bending over, trying to block it like this on the car, you get a lot better result when it's off the car. If it don't come out straight, or you're not happy with it, you can put another 3 coats on it and block it again. The only drawback is you want to make sure your mills don't get too thick, or you can have cracking later on when it starts to cure. Right here, as I'm blocking, it has you can kind of see the tracer has like a light low spot right through here, and right there's a little bit of a low spot. So we'll just keep blocking this both ways. Block it this way, until that disappears. Hold the block good and flat, equal pressure through the whole block, and that will block out. If it didn't block out, you'd run out of primer and start breaking through, and then you'd have to apply more primer or a little bit of glaze coat in there. But as you can see, it's about gone. This is 90% of a good paint job. Getting everything straight and perfect. Painting it is the easy part. Anybody can paint it. Just getting the prep work down and the body work, get it nice and straight, it makes a paint job. Spend a lot of time at the bottom of these doors. That's the #1 factory flaw, was it was so wavy across the bottom of these doors when they crimped the skin on. It's a little bit of a high spot. Still a little low here and a little low right next to that body line. These body lines, when I crimped them in, they were always a little wavy. Block them and really get them good and sharp and pointed. Blow this dust off and you can keep a clean surface. It kind of helps you see the highs and lows. But I'm going to take a dustpan and just sweep that off there. Time consuming and taking your time. There's lots of blocking. We got the lower half of the door blocked out, so then I'm going to start on the upper half. I use pretty much the long block in this whole area, and then I'll use a round block on this. And then the top of it should be flat. Hit that flat across there. And we use a long block. Almost a roll on a whole car. Like right here, this is a very common wavy area around where they stamp these holes in. You can see there's a slight low spot here. Around where the lock cylinder is, you can see it's just pretty much kind of wavy, especially where like that hole is there where they stamp that, it put a low spot. A little bit low right through here, and that's what you look for. Is you look for the difference in the colors, and you want to just block it until it's all uniform. You can see it's low, a little bit on that edge there, a little bit here.
So low is the darker color?
Yeah, that's where basically the sandpaper hasn't touched. So those are your lows and these are your highs, and you just want to block it till it's all uniform. If you still have low spots, like you block it on, you still have a little bit of a low spot here, then you have to go back and scuff that, put a little filler right there, and basically float it out. And that's where you can do multiple primings until you get it perfectly straight. If this was really bad and there was lots of areas on this, you could prime it, block it, re-prime it again, dry block it again until you get it perfectly straight. So this is where you get the real nice paint job, is where you really spend the time and get those factory flaws out. You're actually doing a concourse and you want it as original as possible, you would actually leave those flaws in. Leave the orange peel in the paint. So it comes down to what line you want to cross on becoming original to custom to a in-between of both. I like to do an in-between of both. I like to do the paint far superior to original, because that actually will up the value of your car. If you have it at a sale, an auction or whatever, and somebody's going to buy the car and they see it's got orange peel and waves, they're not gonna want it as much as a nice, perfectly straight paint job. Slight low spot that didn't block real good, so I'm gonna put a little filler right in this area here. And you can see across the top of it, it has a lot of metal showing. That shows that this across here is pretty wavy. So when we reprime, I'll put another extra coat there, maybe even 2 extra coats, and block it a little more the next go around. And you can see like where I broke through, you can see the E-coat underneath. This is a lightweight filler, it's not a glaze. This has a little more filling properties to it. It's an Evercoat product as well. I've used this filler for good 27, 28 years now. It's a very good sanding, very good filler. They also make premiums. Premium is like a glaze and a filler mixed together. It's a real smooth apply and sanding filler. This is mixed pretty hot. It's going to dry really pretty quick. When I blocked this door out, I had a little bit of a low spot right there, so I'm just going to kind of blend it out. And it's probably because the edge is a little high. Yeah, so we need to just kind of level this whole area out. So I kind of go a little further and blend it to where it's blended and floated out. A little area. Edge is a little low. You want to go a little further so it blends it and floats it. There. Like a little pit right there, pinhole. You can daub them with a little filler. 10 to 20 minutes to dry, and then we'll block that down and work it, and then we'll reprime it with our K36. Edge was a little low here, so we're going to float that out and with a little 80 grit, knocking it down, and I'll finish it out with some 180. Usually I'd use a 100 grit, but I'm at 100 grit right now.
How do you know when to stop?
Mostly by feel. It's not something that's precise that you can just, oh, that's what it looks like. It's a developed feel over time. Like here you can see it obviously needs to be blocked down a whole lot more. Okay, I got them knocked down. I use an 80 grit, and I'm going to go back over with the 180. Take that 80 grit scratch out and fine tune it. That'll take care of that low spot there, and then when we prime it, right in between the door handle mounts. So that feels real good now. The block didn't even touch it. And that was from when they stamped those holes in there. It just made a slight low spot. That will blend out. You can't even feel it. And that's the thing about a lot of these high spots is you can't fill them, but they're high. So primer will take care of them. So when I go the next primer, that'll all float out and block. You will never even see that after the next primer.
Now what is going on there?
I had a couple little pinholes there that I just gotta fill in a little bit. Blow these off, and then I'll mask them off, and then we'll prime them. Also, a good way to check bodywork is to spray this on the panel. And you can skylight it down there and see how it looks. puts a sheen on it. It's a called a DX394. It's a ammonia-based cleaner. You can just spray it on there, it gives it a nice sheen. It's a cleaning agent, but it'll also give you where you can skylight it and see if there's any ripples or anything. Just kind of a little trick. Thing looks good. Now we can wipe it off and then we'll mask it. Go down it and look for any imperfections or ripples. Just a way to check your body work. You can put the cleaner on there anytime, like if you kind of want to look at something, but the cleaner is clean it right before we spray it. It gets all the dust and debris off of the surface before we spray the primer. That's one of the things on paint, you got to constantly clean it. Things that can cause a fisheye or separation or dust. Now I'm going to mask it off and get it ready for primer. Reverse taping, and then I'll put paper around it as well. Primer, you don't want to have an expensive gun. They usually last about a year to 2 years before you just chunk them in the trash. Get a new one. Using a K38 high build primer. I'm going to probably put 2 coats of this on. Mix this 4-to-1. Yeah, this is the K38. They have a K36 as well that's a little thinner primer. This is the catalyst. Then I'll put a little reducer in it. So the primer will take care of the pinholes. You just got to smear them in. And like the spots where I recently went back and put a little filler, I'll put 3 coats on those and 2 coats on everything else. I usually let it set for about a month before I wet sand them. That's the final. So you let all the thinners, all that stuff that you put in there, all that evaporate out, and that way you don't have no shrinkage issues when you paint it. This primer, this is the final primer. So this will dry for a month, and then after this point, it's ready for paint. So the next blocking will be blocking, and then after that will be paint. You have less shrinkage when you finish out your filler with the finest paper possible. So yeah, you knock it down with 80 grit, you get it close, and then finish it out with 180 grit. And then when you put the primer on it, if you do have a little shrinkage, well, it's not shrinking down in an 80 grit scratch. It's shrinking down in a 180 scratch. So really you won't see it. It won't be as noticeable. But if you file something down of 80 and it shrinks down, you're going to see these big old gouges. You're going to tell it's filler. You're going to have where the primer's on the filler itself, you'll have a ring there. So say you have a spot of filler, well, you're going to have a ring around that filler because it soaks into the filler different than it does the steel. And then when all that shrinks up, you can see right a perfect ring where that filler spot is. That's why you want to let everything cure as long as possible. A month for primer is just right. Everything's cured. The epoxy primer, so they're cured in 7 days on manufacturer. Like PPG says, the DP epoxy primer is cured in 7 days, and it requires a scuff to spray over it. Now the primers, like where I mixed it, I put reducer in it. Well, you put the reducer in it to help it spray because it's such a thicker product. Now you could use a bigger tip and nail it on there, but if you put just a little bit of thinner, well, it sprays out smoother, it sprays out nicer. Just give it some time for the thinner to come out. Let it come out, and then you're fine. You know, you see these beautiful cars, they got it done that year, and the next year you see it in the show, and you gum up to it, and the paint looks shrunk up because they rushed it. I've seen paint jobs that are 10, 15 years ago, and they didn't rush it, and it looks just as good as day one because they let it cure. Like you put a filler on top of an epoxy primer, you could sand it that day, but you're better off letting it dry overnight. Let it dry overnight. Even the fillers have thinners in it. You let all that evaporate, well, your center not only feathers in better, it blocks better, it sands better. It's not at a state of almost wetness. A lot of people ask, well, why do you e-coat the body first? Well, it keeps it from flash rusting. It's a protective primer. And when you put filler on top of an epoxy primer, well, it can cause moisture under that filler. When if you have a primer under it, not a problem. You put it on bare metal, moisture underneath it, and can cause a slight bit of rust. And that can cause that filler to actually detach from the steel. And that's where you get cracking, all kinds of problems. You can have the filler just fall off in one chunk. But most of the time when you get a surface rust under a filler, it will actually cause a cracking process. And when a lot of guys, they say, well, put lead on it, put lead on. Well, lead will actually cause a chemical. You use a flux acid for that lead to stick to the steel. That flux acid eats on that steel for years and years and years. That's why when you melt it out, you see surface rust under that lead. That's why you want to use a modern product, and you put an epoxy primer in that seam, and you put a modern product in there, you won't have rust. It'll be good for basically ever. Lead is not good at all. It's not only toxic. It will cause corrosion underneath the product. These cars, with the products we use today, if you do it right, there's nothing wrong with driving that car every day and getting 20 years out of a paint job. If you don't get 20 years out of a paint job, there's something wrong. And a lot of people will say, oh, I don't want Bondo on my car. There isn't a car out there that's straight that don't have filler on it. There's nothing wrong with filler at all. Filler's an excellent product. The thing where a lot of people, and it's got a bad rep over the years, is people put it in there over an inch thick and the stuff cracked out, or like I was stating, they put it over bare metal and it caused a chemical reaction, which caused surface rust, caused it to crack and fall out. Now, if you apply it properly and use the modern stuff, it's good forever. Hell, factory uses a lot of fillers. Most of these high-end cars that you see built, a lot of them times they'll coat the car from end to end in a filler. They use a premium filler, and they'll block the whole car like primer. And it's the waves out. These cars are far from straight to begin with.
Bondo is not applied directly to the steel, it's applied to what?
It's applied to an epoxy primer. Guys that know what they're doing, they put an epoxy primer down, and that seals off the surface. That's your base. That's your base foundation, is that epoxy primer. And you want a product that sticks to steel well and is durable. So you got to be careful of the products you choose, and you got to sometimes acid etch them first. You have to do by the proper ways that the manufacturer recommends on the process of application.
In other words, follow directions. Don't wait till all else fails